I still remember the way the sun filtered through my curtains that morning, soft and golden, as if the world itself was determined to be kind. I woke with the usual comfort of my small house in Ohio, the creak of the old floorboards, the faint smell of lavender from the sachets I kept tucked in my dresser drawers. My life was quiet, predictable, and though I sometimes longed for the noise of family, I had convinced myself that stillness had its own kind of peace. That illusion shattered with a single photograph. It was Margaret Lewis, my neighbor and dearest friend, who first brought it to my attention. She arrived at my door that afternoon with a furrow in her brow and her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I think you should see this." I frowned, wondering why her voice carried such weight. She turned the screen toward me and my heart stopped. There, glowing back at me, was an image from social media. My son, Daniel, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his arm proudly around Melissa, his new wife. They were standing under a white arch, surrounded by flowers, their faces lit with joy. Guests clapped in the background, confetti frozen mid-air. A wedding. Their wedding. And I hadn't even known. The room tilted, my fingers trembling as I took the phone from Margaret to see it more clearly. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Every parent dreams of the day their child gets married, dreams of standing close enough to hear their vows, to witness that step into a new chapter of life. Yet here it was. Over. Done. Without me. I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Perhaps it was staged, perhaps just an engagement party dressed up in finery. But the captions under the photos ended any hope. Yesterday was the best day of our lives. Mr. and Mrs. Parker forever. Grateful for everyone who made our wedding so special. Everyone, it seemed, except me. My phone buzzed later that evening, and Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I answered, my voice already frayed. "Daniel, what happened? Why didn't you tell me?" His tone was casual, almost dismissive. "Mom, we wanted something small. We didn't want to make a big deal out of it." "But I'm your mother," I whispered, stunned at the sharp edge of pain cutting into me. "How could you keep your own wedding from me?" There was a pause, and then words that burned deeper than any blade. "We only invited the people who are special to us." Silence stretched between us. I held the phone, but I felt as though I had fallen out of my own life, as though the ground beneath me had disappeared. My son, my only child, had just told me I wasn't special enough to stand at his side when he married the woman he loved. When the call ended, I sat alone at my kitchen table for hours, staring at nothing, replaying the photographs in my mind. I remembered the years of late nights when I stayed awake to soothe him as a boy, the countless hours spent working extra shifts at the library to buy him a car, the meals I skipped so he could have what he needed. To Daniel, those years of sacrifice had amounted to nothing more than disposable. Margaret returned later with a cup of tea, but the tears kept slipping down my cheeks no matter how hard I tried to stop them. "It's cruel," she said, her voice firm, her hand covering mine. "No mother should be treated like that." I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that the boy I raised had simply lost his way. But in my heart, I knew this was not a mistake. It was a choice, and choices have consequences. That night, as the house fell quiet and the streetlights flickered outside my window, I whispered those words Daniel had thrown at me. "Only special people." My voice cracked, but the phrase settled in my chest like a brand. If he believed I wasn't special, then perhaps it was time I stopped pretending he was entitled to every piece of me. It was the beginning of an ache I didn't yet know how to heal, but it was also the start of something else. A slow, steady flame I could feel kindling deep inside. The morning after that phone call, I awoke with eyes swollen from crying, the pillow still damp beneath my cheek. For the first time in many years, I felt like a stranger inside my own home. The walls, lined with family photos, suddenly looked like they belonged to someone else. a woman who once believed love and loyalty were unshakable. I made coffee, though it sat untouched, cooling on the counter as I replayed Daniel's words. Only special people. They echoed like a cruel chant in my head. Each time, it cut a little deeper, stripping away the tenderness I once clung to when I thought of him. By mid-morning, Melissa called. Her voice carried a cheeriness that felt almost mocking. "Evelyn, I hope you're not upset." The wedding was lovely. We just wanted something intimate, you know? My grip tightened on the phone. Intimate? You mean excluding your husband's mother from the most important day of his life? She gave a light laugh, the kind people use when they want to dismiss your feelings. You have to understand, we're building our own life now. It was about us, not anyone else. Her words dripped with condescension. I could almost see her smirk through the line, could almost feel her satisfaction at placing me firmly on the outside of their new circle. I ended the call quickly, unwilling to let her hear the crack in my voice. That afternoon, I took a slow walk down the street, desperate for fresh air. Margaret waved from her porch and hurried over. "How are you holding up, Evelyn?" she asked, concern etched into her features. I shook my head, trying to steady myself. I can't stop hearing him say it. As if I've been erased from his life with one sentence, Margaret's eyes flashed with indignation. "You raised that boy. Don't you dare let them make you feel less than what you are." Her words comforted me, yet a heaviness lingered. That evening, alone in my living room, I began to look through my bank statements. I don't know what drew me there, maybe a need to measure the truth against the lies I'd been told. For decades, I had helped Daniel, quietly covering his rent during college, paying off his car loan, slipping him money for bills even after he married Melissa. Each check, each transfer, each withdrawal was a stitch in a quilt of sacrifice. Page after page, number after number, I wrote them down. By the time I finished, my hands were stiff and my heart was pounding. The total stared back at me, impossible to ignore. Tens of thousands of dollars. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of years pressing against my chest. I had given so much, too much, while receiving so little gratitude in return. Now, when he finally had the chance to honor me with presence and respect, he chose instead to humiliate me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Melissa's airy laugh, Daniel's cold dismissal. Something inside me shifted. The woman who once excused, forgave, and overlooked had vanished. In her place was a woman who was tired of being taken for granted. As I stared at the dark ceiling, one thought became clear. If they considered me disposable, then they would no longer have the privilege of leaning on me. My son had drawn the line with his words. I was about to draw mine with actions. For most of my life, money was never about wealth or comfort. It was about security, making sure Daniel had what he needed, even when I had to go without. I lived frugally, stretching every paycheck from the library, patching old clothes and clipping coupons at the grocery store. Every dollar I saved, I poured into him, believing it would give him a better future. But sitting at my dining table that evening, surrounded by neat stacks of bank statements and receipts, I began to see the truth I had avoided for far too long. Each number I circled told a story, and none of those stories spoke of gratitude. There was the $1,200 I gave him during his first year of college when he claimed his scholarship didn't cover books. I remembered skipping meals that month, convincing myself soup and crackers were enough. Then there was the $5,000 down payment I pulled from my retirement account so he could buy his first car. A car that Melissa later traded in for something newer, never once acknowledging the sacrifice. And on it went. Rent payments, utility bills, even the credit card debt I quietly settled when he fell behind. The numbers blurred together as I added them on a yellow legal pad, the pen digging so hard into the paper that my hand ached. When I reached the final sum, my breath caught. $34,000. I stared at the figure, blinking back tears. $34,000. more than the cost of my modest home when Robert, my late husband, and I first bought it, more than I had ever dared to spend on myself. And yet I had handed it away, piece by piece, to the same son who now dismissed me as unworthy of being special. The betrayal burned sharper now. It wasn't just emotional, it was financial, practical, and devastating. I had built Daniel's safety net at the cost of my own, and he had shredded the bond between us without hesitation. I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding myself. "No more," I whispered into the silence of the room. My voice wavered, but the words steadied me. "No more." The next morning, I made my way to the bank. The air was crisp, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my shoes as I walked with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Inside, I asked to speak with Mr. Alan Brooks, the banker who had always treated me with respect. When he greeted me with his usual warm smile, I felt my resolve tighten. "Mr. Brooks," I said firmly, sliding my checkbook and account papers across his desk, "I need to make some changes." He looked at me with quiet curiosity. "Of course, Mrs. Parker. What sort of changes?" I took a steadying breath. "I want every automatic transfer to Daniel cancelled. Every single one. And I want tighter security on my accounts. No one but me should have access." His brows lifted slightly, but he didn't question my decision. Instead, he nodded and began typing on his computer, his fingers moving quickly. "We'll get that taken care of right away." As I watched him work, a strange mix of sorrow and relief washed over me. Part of me mourned the bond I had lost, but another part, the stronger part, felt lighter. For the first time, I was drawing a line, reclaiming the pieces of myself I had so freely given away. That afternoon, Daniel called. His tone was impatient, clipped. "Mum, the rent's due. Did you forget the transfer?" I held the phone close, my pulse steady. "No, Daniel," I replied. "I didn't forget. I cancelled it." There was a pause, followed by a sharp inhale. "You what? You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, my voice firmer than I expected. "Daniel, I've supported you for years, but you made it clear I'm not special. From now on, you and Melissa will have to manage on your own." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with shock and anger. I ended the call before he could respond. My hand trembled slightly, but deep inside, I felt something shift. Power, independence, control. That night, as I sat in my quiet house, I realized something important. Love without respect is nothing more than dependency. And I was done being dependent on their approval. The days following that phone call were a storm of emotions. At times, I felt a pang of guilt so sharp, it almost sent me running back to the bank to undo what I had done. At other times, I felt free, as if I had finally taken a breath after holding it for decades. But guilt is a stubborn companion, and for a mother, it comes dressed as duty. Each time doubt whispered in my ear, I returned to that number on my legal pad. $34,000. 34,000 reasons to stand firm. 34,000 reminders that love, when twisted into entitlement, is no longer love at all. Daniel tried calling again. At first, I ignored the ringing, letting it echo through the house like a ghost of obligation. But eventually, my resolve demanded more than silence. It demanded words. When I answered, his tone was angry, almost incredulous. "Mom, Melissa and I are drowning over here. We need help, and you've always been there. Why are you acting like this now?" I let him speak, listening to the desperation beneath the arrogance. And then, calmly, I repeated the very words he had once carved into me. "I only help people who are special to me." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear his breath catch, could almost picture his face tightening with disbelief. "Are you serious?" he spat. "Dead serious," I said softly, though my voice carried more steel than I thought possible. "You made your choices, Daniel. You chose who was special. Now I'm choosing too." He muttered something I couldn't quite catch before the line went dead. For the first time, I didn't collapse into tears. Instead, I felt an ember of strength glowing in my chest. That evening, I took further steps. I called Mr. Alan Brooks at the bank again to confirm everything was secure. He assured me no one but me could access the accounts. Then I phoned Margaret and asked if she'd be willing to keep an eye on the house whenever I ran errands. She agreed immediately, her loyalty a balm to my battered heart. The following morning, I drove to the hardware store. The bell above the door jingled, and Mr. Robert Hayes, the owner, looked up from the counter. "Mrs. Parker, haven't seen you in a while," I offered a tight smile. "I need new locks, Robert. And some advice on security cameras." He studied me for a moment as though weighing whether to ask why. But instead, he simply said, "Let's get you taken care of." Back home, I installed the locks myself, feeling the click of the new bolts as though they were echoes of my own boundaries snapping into place. The cameras were trickier, but with Robert's instructions, I managed to mount them above the front and back doors. When I was done, I stood on my porch, breathing in the crisp autumn air. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe, not because I had shut the world out, but because I had claimed the right to decide who I would let in. That evening, Daniel showed up at my door. Melissa stood beside him, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, irritated line. Daniel raised his fist to knock, but before his knuckles touched the wood, I pulled the door open, blocking the entry with my body. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "We just want to talk," Melissa said sweetly, though her eyes glittered with something harder. "Then talk from there," I replied, refusing to step aside. Daniel's expression hardened. "You can't keep shutting us out, Mom. This isn't right." I met his gaze without flinching. "No, Daniel. What wasn't right was erasing me from your wedding. What wasn't right was using me as your bank. This," I gestured to the locked door and the cameras above us, "this is me taking back what little respect I have left." His jaw tightened. Melissa whispered something in his ear, and finally they turned and walked down the steps. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I had drawn the line, and this time I wasn't going to erase it. The uneasy calm did not last long. For a few days, the phone stayed quiet, and I allowed myself to believe that perhaps Daniel and Melissa had accepted my decision. I kept busy, raking leaves in the yard, sipping coffee with Margaret on her porch, even rediscovering old books I hadn't read in years. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I had reclaimed my life. But peace, I was learning, was fragile when others believed they owned a piece of it. It was a Thursday afternoon when the intrusion came. I had just settled into my armchair with a novel when the sound of a car pulling into my driveway caught my ear. I peered through the curtain, and my stomach tightened. Daniel's truck, Melissa beside him. And stepping out of the back seat, a man I didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a leather briefcase. I didn't open the door when they knocked, but Daniel's voice boomed from the porch. "Mom, you need to let us in. We have something important to discuss." Through the peephole, I saw Melissa clutching a folder stuffed with papers, her eyes sharp and determined. The stranger straightened his tie and adjusted his glasses. It was clear they hadn't come to reconcile. They had come prepared, armed with authority. I cracked the door just enough to speak, my chains still in place. "Who is this?" I asked, pointing toward the man. Melissa smiled thinly. "This is Mr. Richard Cole, our attorney. He's here to help us settle some things." My pulse quickened. "Settle what exactly?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not making rational decisions anymore, Mom. You're being manipulated. We need you to sign over some legal documents so we can handle things for you. It'll be easier for everyone." My throat went dry. The gall of it. After all I had sacrificed, they wanted to strip away the last thing I had left, my independence. I shut the door enough to release the chain, then opened it wide, standing square in the frame. "Let me make something clear," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions. And I will not sign anything you bring into this house. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, adopting a tone of rehearsed concern. Mrs. Parker, we only want what's best for you. Daniel and Melissa are worried you might not be able to manage on your own. The words stung, but I held my ground. The only thing I need managing, I said sharply, is the door you're standing in front of. Daniel's face reddened. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice but sharpening my tone. Harder? Daniel, you haven't seen hard yet. Now leave before I call the police. For a moment, none of them moved. Melissa's smile faltered. Mr. Cole shifted uncomfortably and Daniel's eyes burned with frustrated disbelief. Finally, with a muttered curse, Daniel turned and stomped down the steps. Melissa followed, whispering furiously at him, while Mr. Cole offered me a polite but uneasy nod before retreating to the car. I closed the door, locked it, and leaned back against it, my heart hammering. My legs trembled, but the fire inside me burned brighter. They had crossed a line, and in doing so, they had revealed just how far they were willing to go. That night, I called Margaret to recount what had happened. Her outrage was immediate. Evelyn, this isn't just cruelty anymore. This is a threat. You need help. Real help. She was right. The next morning, I searched for an attorney of my own. When I walked into the quiet office of Mr. Thomas Gray, a seasoned lawyer with kind eyes and a measured voice, I felt the first flicker of hope. After I told him everything, he leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. Mrs. Parker, what you've described is a textbook case of elder financial abuse. And if they've already brought a lawyer to your doorstep, you can bet they're preparing something more serious. The word abuse struck me hard. I had always thought of abuse as bruises and shouts, not manipulation and paperwork. But hearing it named made me realize the depth of what was happening. Mr. Gray folded his hands. You've done the right thing coming here. We'll take steps to protect you, but you'll need to be strong. This may get worse before it gets better. I nodded, though my stomach twisted with dread. Worse. The thought was terrifying. But I had already survived the worst heartbreak a mother could face, being told by her only child that she wasn't special. Whatever came next, I would not let them take the rest of me. Walking out of Mr. Gray's office that morning, I felt as though I had finally taken my first real step onto solid ground. For weeks, I had been stumbling through confusion, hurt, and anger, unsure of how to defend myself. But now I had someone on my side. Someone who understood not only the law, but the cruelty I was facing. Mr. Gray had listened with quiet patience, never interrupting as I poured out my story. His eyes had softened when I described Daniel's cold dismissal, hardened when I recounted the financial drain, and sharpened with focus when I explained how they had arrived at my home with their lawyer in tow. Evelyn, he said gently, I need you to understand something. People often think abuse is only physical, but what you're experiencing is just as dangerous. Financial coercion, emotional manipulation, even attempts to strip you of your rights. It's all abuse. And it has to stop. Hearing those words spoken aloud by a professional was like having a veil pulled back. For years, I had excused Daniel's behavior as immaturity, Melissa's sharp tongue as insecurity. But in truth, I had been enabling their control, letting them feed on my sacrifices until I was nearly emptied. Mr. Gray outlined our next steps. First, we secure everything financially, which you've already started by cancelling transfers. Next, we'll document every interaction, every phone call, every letter, every attempt they make to pressure you. And lastly, we'll prepare for the possibility of court. From what you've told me, I suspect they may attempt to file for guardianship or power of attorney. If that happens, we'll be ready. The thought of my own son trying to declare me incapable made my chest tighten. But Mr. Gray's steady tone reassured me. You are competent, Evelyn. You are clear. I'll help you prove it if we need to. When I left his office, the autumn wind was brisk, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. For the first time in weeks, I inhaled deeply without feeling that familiar weight pressing down on my lungs. I wasn't alone anymore. That afternoon, Margaret came by with her usual kindness. I sat her down at the kitchen table and explained everything Mr. Gray had told me. Her hands tightened around her teacup as she listened. "So, it's official then," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just family drama. It's abuse." I nodded slowly. "It's hard to admit, but yes, that's what it is." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Well, then they'll have to get through me before they get to you. You're not fighting this battle alone." Her loyalty made my eyes sting. For every betrayal that cut me, there was still someone willing to stand by my side. The days that followed were strangely calmer, though tension always hummed beneath the surface. I installed another camera near the garage, kept a notebook by the phone, and started jotting down every call and visit. Each entry felt like stacking bricks to build a wall, a barrier against their attempts to control me. One evening, as I sorted through my notes, the phone rang. It was Melissa. Her tone was dripping with false sweetness. "Evelyn, we just want what's best for you. If you'd sign some paperwork, it would make everything easier. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or decisions anymore." My pen scratched across the paper as I wrote her words verbatim. "Melissa," I said calmly, "I've managed on my own for 71 years. I assure you I'm not about to stop now." She huffed, her mask slipping. "You're being unreasonable. Daniel and I are only trying to help." "Help?" I repeated. "Help would have been inviting me to your wedding. Help would have been gratitude for every dollar and every sacrifice. What you're asking for isn't help, it's control." I hung up before she could respond, the ink still drying on my notebook. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with resolve. That night, as I stood by the window watching the streetlight glow against the empty road, I whispered to myself, "You will not take me down. Not like this." The woman I once was, forgiving, pliable, desperate for love, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had finally found an ally willing to fight. The knock came on a grey Tuesday morning. I had been in the kitchen, peeling apples for a pie, the faint scent of cinnamon already filling the house. When I opened the door, I expected to see Margaret or perhaps the mailman. Instead, a woman stood there with a clipboard tucked under her arm and a badge clipped neatly to her jacket. "Mrs. Evelyn Parker?" she asked, her voice professional, but not unkind. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "My name is Angela Morales. I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received a report expressing concerns about your ability to care for yourself. I need to ask you a few questions." The knife in my hand nearly slipped. For a moment, the room tilted, the world narrowing around me. A report? About me? My stomach sank with understanding. Only Daniel and Melissa would stoop this low. I gestured for her to step inside, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Of course. Please, come in." Angela followed me to the living room, her eyes quietly scanning the space. She noted the neatness of the house, the organized bookshelf, the framed photographs on the mantel. She wrote something down, her expression unreadable. "I just need to ask some routine questions," she explained. "Do you handle your own finances?" "Yes," I answered firmly. "I've managed my accounts for decades. I recently met with my banker to update my protections. Do you cook for yourself?" I motioned toward the kitchen where the pie crust rested on the counter. "Every day. Tonight it's apple pie, tomorrow maybe chicken soup." Angela's mouth curved in the faintest smile. She jotted another note. "Do you have friends or family nearby who check in?" "Margaret Lewis lives next door," I said. "She's been my friend for 20 years. She visits daily. I'm not isolated, if that's what you're wondering." The questions went on for nearly half an hour, covering everything from medication to transportation. By the end, I could feel the tension in my shoulders. the weight of being judged, measured, evaluated in my own home. Still, I answered, calmly, truthfully, refusing to let Daniel's lies unravel me. Finally, Angela set her clipboard down. Mrs. Parker, I'll be honest with you. From what I've seen today, you're not only capable, you're thriving. Whoever filed this report, it doesn't match reality. Relief coursed through me like a tide. My throat tightened with gratitude. Thank you, I whispered. Angela gathered her papers. False reports happen more often than you'd think. Sometimes family members have motives. If you ever feel harassed or unsafe, please call us directly. We can note this in your file. After she left, I sank into the sofa, shaking. The audacity of it. My own son, my flesh and blood, trying to paint me as incompetent. They wanted me stripped of dignity, labelled as incapable, so they could swoop in and seize control. When Margaret came over that evening, I recounted the entire visit. Her face reddened with fury. How dare they? Evelyn, they're trying to destroy you from the inside out. I know, I said quietly, my voice raw, but it didn't work. And it won't. That night, I called Mr. Gray and explained what had happened. He listened without interruption, then said with calm certainty, "We'll add this to our records." A false report to Adult Protective Services is serious, Evelyn. It shows intent. If they think this strengthens their case, they're mistaken. It only weakens their credibility. I hung up feeling steadier. For every move they made, I had proof to counter it. For every falsehood, I had the truth. Still, as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, the ache of betrayal gnawed at me. How had Daniel fallen so far from the boy I once held close? How could he let Melissa pull him into such cruelty? I didn't know the answers, but I did know this. The war for my freedom had begun in earnest, and I wouldn't lose. The morning after the visit from Adult Protective Services, I stood at my window, watching the last of the autumn leaves tumble from the maple tree in my front yard. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. Angela Morales had seen through the lies, and Mr. Gray had assured me we would use it to our advantage. Still, a small voice inside me whispered doubt. What if Daniel and Melissa managed to twist the truth again? That doubt began to quiet when the phone rang. It was Henry Clark, the pharmacist who had filled my prescriptions for years. His tone was apologetic. "Mrs. Parker, I need to tell you something. Daniel came in here last week and tried to convince me you weren't managing your medication properly. He wanted me to make a note about it. I refused. I felt my breath catch." "He did what?" Henry's voice grew firm. "I told him I've never had concerns about you. You're punctual, organized, and responsible. I won't let anyone suggest otherwise. If you need me to testify, I will." My throat tightened with gratitude. "Thank you, Henry. Truly." Later that same day, I stopped by Robert Hayes' hardware store to pick up an extra pack of batteries for the cameras. Robert leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. "Evelyn, I don't know what's going on, but Daniel and his wife came in here asking if I'd noticed you struggling with repairs. Wanted me to say you seemed confused about basic things. I told them the truth. You installed those locks and cameras yourself. You're sharper than most people half your age." His words warmed me like a blanket. These were people who had known me for decades, who had watched me navigate life with independence and care. They saw me clearly even when my own son chose to cloud me with lies. When I returned home, Margaret was waiting on my porch, her arms crossed. "You won't believe this," she said. "Melissa came by while you were out. Tried to convince me to tell anyone who asked that you've been forgetful lately, maybe even a danger to yourself." My stomach twisted, but Margaret's eyes blazed. I told her straight, Evelyn is as capable as anyone I know, and if she ever needs anything, she asks for it. Don't you worry. If they try to drag me into their schemes, I'll be the first to shut them down. Tears pricked my eyes as I unlocked the door. I had braced myself for isolation, convinced that Daniel and Melissa's whispers might erode the trust others had in me. Instead, I found loyalty, honesty, and solidarity. Piece by piece, the lies they spun were being unraveled by truth-tellers who refused to be manipulated. That evening, I called Mr. Gray and told him everything. He listened carefully, then said, "This is exactly what we need, Evelyn. Independent witnesses who can speak to your competence. When the time comes, their voices will be louder than any accusations Daniel and Melissa throw at you." After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the glow of the lamp casting soft light on the pages of my notebook. For weeks, I had been documenting threats and insults, building a record of their cruelty. But now I realized I was also building something else. A wall of truth fortified by friends. For the first time in months, I felt steady enough to sleep through the night. The fear that had gnawed at me was still there, but now it was tempered by hope. Because when the people who truly know you stand by your side, lies lose their power. I drifted to sleep with one thought in my heart. Daniel and Melissa had underestimated me. They believed they could isolate me, silence me, strip me of dignity. But they hadn't counted on the strength of a community that saw me clearly and was ready to speak when it mattered most. The letter arrived on a damp November morning, slipped through the mail slot with the rest of the day's delivery. I didn't recognize the envelope at first. Heavy paper, embossed with a law firm's crest. But the moment I slid a finger beneath the flap and pulled the pages free, my knees nearly gave way. It was a petition for guardianship. Daniel and Melissa were officially asking the court to declare me incapable of managing my own affairs. The words on the page blurred through my tears, but the meaning was unmistakable. They wanted my freedom. They wanted control of my home, my finances, my very life. For a long time, I just sat at the table staring at the document. The betrayal felt total now, no longer hidden behind sweet voices or feigned concern. This was war. When Margaret came by that afternoon, she found me still clutching the papers. Her eyes scanned the first page, and she let out a gasp. "Evelyn, this is outrageous. How dare they?" Her anger lit a spark in me. "I should have seen it coming," I said quietly. "All their schemes, all the lies. This was always their goal." Without hesitation, I called Mr. Gray. When I explained, his voice was calm but resolute. "I was afraid of this, Evelyn. But don't panic. Guardianship is not granted easily, and with the evidence we've gathered, we'll fight this." He gave me a list of steps to take. First, I scheduled a full medical and psychological evaluation with Dr. Elaine Turner, a respected physician in town. She greeted me with kindness, guiding me through memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and long conversations about my daily routines. At the end of our sessions, she looked me in the eye and said, "Evelyn, you're as capable and sharp as anyone your age." I'll make sure my report reflects that. Her words soothed me, but anxiety still crept in late at night. What if the court believed Daniel? What if Melissa's fabrications swayed them? I wrote in my journal to quiet my thoughts, reminding myself of every person who had pledged their support. Henry, Robert, Margaret, even Angela Morales. They knew the truth. I had to trust that truth would stand taller than lies. In the weeks before the court date, Mr. Gray prepared me meticulously. We practiced questions I might face on the stand, from simple ones. How do you pay your bills, to more pointed ones. Have you ever forgotten to take medication? He encouraged me to answer calmly, honestly, and with confidence. One evening, as we wrapped up a rehearsal in his office, he leaned forward. "Evelyn, this won't be easy. Guardianship cases can be brutal, especially when family is involved. They'll try to paint you as weak, they'll exaggerate, maybe even invent stories. But remember, you are not weak, you are not alone. And the law is on your side." His steady gaze anchored me. For so long, I had seen myself as a victim of Daniel's betrayal, powerless against his manipulation. But sitting there across from Mr. Gray, I felt something shift. I wasn't powerless, I was preparing to fight back. Not just for my money or my home, but for the dignity that Daniel had tried to strip from me. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress Robert once loved, and pinned a silver brooch to the collar. As I looked in the mirror, I whispered to myself, "You are capable. You are strong. You are enough." When Margaret arrived to drive me to the courthouse, she squeezed my hand tightly. "Whatever happens in there, Evelyn, you have already proven who you are." Don't forget that I nodded, steadying my breath. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about showing Daniel and Melissa and the world that I would never surrender my life to their greed. As we pulled away from my quiet little house, the courthouse looming ahead in the distance, I felt fear pressing at the edges of my chest. But beneath it, stronger than ever, was resolve. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a mix of history and authority that pressed heavily against my chest as Margaret and I stepped inside. The hallways echoed with footsteps, the occasional murmur of voices. My palms were damp, and I clutched my purse tighter than necessary, reminding myself to breathe. Mr. Gray met us outside the courtroom, his calm presence grounding me. "Remember, Evelyn," he said softly, "you've done nothing wrong. Speak plainly, answer honestly, and trust the truth." Inside, the courtroom felt colder than I expected. The high ceilings and worn benches lent a solemn air, while the American flag hung proudly behind the judge's bench. At the far side of the room, Daniel and Melissa sat with their lawyer, Richard Cole. Daniel's face was set with determination, but Melissa's lips curved in that smug smile I had come to know too well. When the bailiff called the case, my heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, took her seat. "We are here today to consider a petition for guardianship filed by Daniel and Melissa Parker on behalf of Mrs. Evelyn Parker." The words stung, but I lifted my chin. This was my life they were discussing, and I would not shrink. Mr. Cole opened with practiced concern, painting a picture of me as a fragile, forgetful woman, vulnerable to confusion. "Your Honor, our only goal is to ensure Mrs. Parker's well-being. She's 71, living alone, and showing signs of decline. Guardianship would allow Daniel and Melissa to provide the stability she needs." Melissa nodded along solemnly, though her eyes flickered toward me with triumph. Daniel avoided my gaze altogether. Mr. Gray rose smoothly when it was our turn. His voice was calm, but firm. "Your Honor, this case is not about care or compassion. It is about control. Mrs. Parker is fully capable of managing her own affairs. We will present evidence, medical, financial, and testimonial, to show that this petition is not only unnecessary, but malicious." The judge gestured for the proceedings to begin. Witnesses were called. Melissa spoke first, recounting often exaggerated tales of me forgetting things and struggling to cook meals. As she spoke, I felt my fists clench. Each lie cut deeper, but I forced myself to remain composed. When Mr. Gray cross-examined, his questions sliced through her story with surgical precision. "Mrs. Parker," he said evenly, "isn't it true that Evelyn prepared a full Thanksgiving dinner just last year, which you attended?" Melissa hesitated, eyes darting. "Well, yes, but..." "And isn't it true that Evelyn drives herself, shops for groceries independently, and has never been cited by doctors or professionals for incompetence?" She faltered. "I suppose, but she's slowing down." "Slowing down is not incapacity," Mr. Gray interrupted. "Isn't it also true that you and Daniel have received tens of thousands of dollars in financial assistance from Evelyn over the years?" Melissa's face flushed. "That was her choice." "Exactly," Mr. Gray said smoothly. "Her choice. A capable one." Daniel took the stand next, his voice tight with frustration. He spoke of concern, of fear for my well-being, but his words rang hollow. When pressed, he couldn't name a single instance of true neglect or danger. Instead, he stumbled, contradicted himself, and revealed more about his dependence on my money than about my supposed decline. When Henry Clark testified, his words carried weight. I've been Evelyn's pharmacist for years. She manages her medications with precision. I have never once been concerned about her competence, Robert Hayes followed, his voice firm. She came to me for locks and cameras, installed them herself. That's not someone incapable of handling life. Even Angela Morales, the social worker, took the stand, stating clearly, "My evaluation found Evelyn Parker fully capable." The report filed was unfounded. By the time Dr. Elaine Turner presented her medical evaluation, crisp, detailed, undeniable, I could see the shift in the judge's expression. The scales were tipping, and they were tipping in my favor. Finally, it was my turn. My legs shook as I walked to the stand, but Mr. Gray's nod steadied me. Under oath, I spoke simply and truthfully. I described my daily routines, my financial independence, my friendships, and the quiet life I had built. My voice trembled at times, but I met the judge's eyes and said, "I may be 71, Your Honor, but I am not broken. I am not incompetent. What I am is a mother who has been betrayed, and I will not surrender my life to lies." The courtroom fell silent. Even Daniel looked down at his hands. When I stepped down, Mr. Gray gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. The battle wasn't over yet, but I could feel it. The tide had turned. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to taste. As I sat beside Mr. Gray, my hands folded tightly in my lap, I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the back wall. Every second seemed stretched, elongated, as though time itself wanted to make me wait just a little longer before the truth was spoken. The judge glanced over her notes, her expression unreadable. Daniel shifted in his seat, his knee bouncing nervously. Melissa whispered something to him, her face pale beneath the courtroom lights. Mr. Cole stared straight ahead, his polished demeanor beginning to crack at the edges. Finally, the judge cleared her throat. The sound silenced the room. "I have listened carefully to the testimony and reviewed the evidence presented," she began. "Guardianship is a serious matter. It is not granted lightly as it strips an individual of fundamental rights. The petitioners, Daniel and Melissa Parker, have alleged that Mrs. Evelyn Parker is incapable of managing her affairs. However, the evidence does not support this claim." My breath caught, and for a moment I didn't dare move. The judge continued, her tone firm. "On the contrary, the testimony of independent witnesses, including professionals such as Dr. Turner and Miss Morales, demonstrates that Mrs. Parker is fully competent. Furthermore, the financial history shows a long pattern of generosity from Mrs. Parker to her son and daughter-in-law, not mismanagement on her part." She paused, looking directly at Daniel and Melissa. Her voice sharpened. "What concerns this court is the clear attempt to misuse legal proceedings for personal gain. This petition appears to be less about care and more about control." Melissa's face crumpled. Daniel's eyes flickered with something between anger and shame. The judge turned back to me. "Therefore, the petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Parker retains full rights and independence. This court strongly cautions the petitioners against any further harassment or attempts to undermine her autonomy. Such actions could result in legal consequences." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, tears springing to my eyes. Margaret gripped my hand, whispering, "You did it, Evelyn. You won." Across the aisle, Daniel sat stiff, his face drained of color. Melissa looked away, her lips pressed into a hard line. Their lawyer gathered his papers quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mr. Gray leaned close and murmured, "Justice served." His calm smile was the anchor I needed in that dizzying moment. As we left the courtroom, the weight I had carried for months seemed to lift. The ache of betrayal would never fully vanish, but the fear, the paralyzing fear of losing myself, was gone. The law had spoken. The truth had prevailed. Walking down those courthouse steps, the autumn wind sharp against my face, I felt taller than I had in years. I was still Evelyn Parker, competent, independent, free, and no one, Not even my own son could take that from me. In the weeks following the trial, my house felt different. The same walls stood, the same familiar creak echoed in the floorboards, but the air was lighter, freer. For the first time in months, I could sit by the window with a cup of tea and not feel the shadow of dread pressing in. The cameras above my doors remained, the locks still sturdy, but now they felt like choices I had made for myself, not barricades against fear. Daniel and Melissa never called again. I heard through Margaret that they had moved to another part of town, their faces tight with embarrassment when neighbours asked questions they couldn't answer. Their silence was its own kind of apology, not one I needed, nor one I would accept, but a silence that left me room to breathe. One afternoon, I sat with Mr. Gray in his office for a final meeting. He reviewed the documents, ensuring every safeguard was in place. "You've been through a storm, Evelyn," he said kindly, "but you came out standing." Stronger than when you walked in here months ago, I smiled faintly. I didn't think I could do it. But I suppose sometimes life forces us to prove ourselves. Or to rediscover ourselves, he said, his eyes steady. Those words stayed with me. For years, I had been defined by what I gave away. My time, my money, my forgiveness. Now, for the first time, I was learning to define myself by what I chose to keep. I made changes. I joined a local book club where evenings were filled with laughter, stories, and the quiet joy of companionship. I began volunteering at the library, helping children discover the magic of reading. On weekends, Margaret and I drove to nearby towns just to explore, our conversations spilling out like a river unburdened by fear. But my greatest change was a promise I made to myself. No more living in the shadows of someone else's choices. I sold the old house, its walls carrying both love and pain, and bought a smaller cottage with a garden out back. Planting tulip bulbs in the cool soil, I felt the earth welcome me into a new season of life. Each bloom would be a reminder that growth comes after endings, that beauty can return even after the hardest winters. One evening, as I watered the garden, Margaret asked softly, "Do you ever miss them, Evelyn? Despite everything?" I paused, watching the soil drink in the water. I miss the boy Daniel used to be, the one who looked up at me with wide eyes and thought I was his whole world. But the man he became, no, I don't miss him. What I miss is gone, and what I have now is enough. That night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote the final entry in the journal where I had recorded every battle. They thought they could strip me of dignity, of independence, of self. But in trying to take my life, they gave it back to me. My revenge is not bitterness. My revenge is living free, living whole, living on my own terms. As I closed the journal, I felt peace settle over me like a warm blanket. The hurt would never vanish entirely, but it no longer defined me. I had been excluded from their wedding, told I wasn't special, pushed to the edge of despair. But in the end, I had discovered something far greater than their approval. I had discovered myself. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all.